You're listening to Precinct 444, a podcast network from the National Law Enforcement Museum. Today we're bringing you an episode from the Encore series, where we revisit past museum programs and conversations. On May 10th, 2010, more than 13 years ago, then Arkansas Game and Fish Officer Mike Neal received a call about an officer-involved shooting an hour away from his location. His response and actions upon arriving on scene were nothing short of heroic. Today's episode of Encore, part 2 of this series, concludes with a deeper discussion between Mike Neal and Jonathan Thompson, Executive Director of the National Sheriff's Association and the host of Reflections on the 2010 West Memphis Shooting with Sheriff Mike Neal, which originally aired in May 2020. Sheriff Neal provides further details about that day, mental health and his struggles with PTSD in the years following the incident, and his duties as sheriff in Monroe County. Part 2 concludes with a Q&A and closing remarks by Marcia Ferranto, CEO of the Memorial Fund. As with Part 1, let's take a moment of silence to remember Sergeant Brandon Paudert and Officer Bill Evans, the two West Memphis officers who lost their lives that day. And now for Part 2 of Reflections on the 2010 West Memphis Shooting with Sheriff Mike Neal.
Our special guest tonight, Sheriff Mike Neal from Monroe County in Arkansas, national hero who, to remind everybody, he's received a call over 100 miles away. He's a fish and game warden for the state of Arkansas. There are 2 downed officers, unknown what other casualties he's faced with. He's driving in excess of 80 miles an hour to get to the scene as fast as possible. He's nearly run out of gas. He stopped at the gas station, filled up. He's had that touch on his shoulder, my God, that says, you're in the fight. You need to get your fight game on. He's rammed the bad guys in the parking lot. He's initiated a man-to-man, hand-to-hand combat via weapons. He's emptied his magazine and his rifle, and is now faced with return fire from the perpetrators. Shots are hitting him and hitting his glass and hitting his posts in his vehicle. He's getting crossfire from the passenger side. And he realizes, 1, he's out of ammunition, 2, he's in a vulnerable position. He puts it in reverse, floors it, and backs up. At that point, he's got to get out of the vehicle. Mike, I'm going to turn it to you here in a second. You get out of the vehicle, you check for wounds, you see you've got some scrapes and obviously some wounds. You're there with another officer. What's going through your mind? What is that training telling you now? What have you got to do?
Well, you've been in a gunfight and you're hurting. So first you're going to look for blood, and that's what I was doing. And I was gotten some pretty good, it turned out to be glass injury. Shrapnel from the bullets was in my left shoulder and my hip. So I knew I was bleeding. So, I'd taken a pretty good blow to the head. That was pretty traumatic thing you just went through. So your brain's going 2 million miles an hour trying to catch up. Your adrenaline is unbelievable, the adrenaline. So I'm checking myself, trying to figure out, do I have bullet holes in me? And if I do, I got to stop the bleeding, whatever. I'm kind of self-checking myself. When the other officer comes up and Nick picks me up off the ground and he's screaming at me, "You're okay?" And I said, "Man, I think I'm hit." Put me down. First of all, you're scaring me. But he sets me down. He starts checking me. He says, "You're fine." And he said, "Let's go. We got to re-engage." So as we ran by the truck, I reached in and I grabbed my rifle back out, made it back ready, got it ready for action. And that's when we all started to approach the van at that point. At this time, we didn't know if how many suspects were in the van. The initial call was it was an MS-13 gang with AK-47. So, we really didn't know what we were approaching into the second time. We didn't know if we were fixing to have another gunfight or what, but all the brave guys that were there with me, they didn't flinch. We all jumped in there and
Yeah.
went after the fight again.
I have a question for you. How many sworn law enforcement officers are you seeing from your vantage point now? What is the situation assessed to you?
So as I was looking around, I knew there was probably 10, maybe. I wasn't sure. Now, as time went on, there was 100. I mean, they were coming from everywhere. But at the initial point of, going to the scene again to make it clear, I knew there wasn't over 10 of us. So, I was pretty comforted by the fact that there was 10, that I wasn't alone. So
you're looking across this parking lot, and you're realizing that you've got to reengage the officer that's there with you. Walk us through that. Okay, we've got to go back. How do we do that? What's the mechanism? What's the tactics that you put into place?
Well, so everybody was trying to maneuver around the vehicles, using those for cover as best as possible to get into place, to get a better vantage point inside the van so we could see what was going on. We were all kind of moving separately at one point, and you can watch all the videos on YouTube. And then there at the last, we all get on a straight line, and we all approach the van at the same time. Now, we did not have shields. We were just going up there with the body armor we had on and hope for the best,
There's some medals over your shoulder there. Notice that.
Yes.
Tell me, before I change to the next question, just tell me a little bit about this.
There's 43 awards on this wall, and every one of these awards were from the May 20th. And if you look at this one right here, this is the Medal of Valor from the President. Then I can move I don't know if I'll be able to get my computer back straight, but there's also the Medal of Valor right here. This one, that's the Arkansas Game and Fish Medal of Valor. It moves over. This one right here is, if I can figure out, I would not make a good newscaster. This one here is the Buford Pusser Award, which I thought was really cool. The NRA award is right above the Medal of Valor, but they keep going. I mean, they're all the way to the ceiling, and they kind of wrap all the way across. So it looks like a lot, but there aren't enough. I'm sure I speak for the country when I say that. A couple of other. Let's get back to the incident itself now. How many bad guys are there? What do you know? How many are? I mean, you gotta be thinking. Are there more than two? Is there more than what I'm seeing? Where are they coming from behind me now? Where do I have to look? Well, we knew that. Well, we were told that it was the MS-13 gang. So yeah, we didn't know how many were in this van. When the call went out, we were looking for a stolen white church van with the MS-13 gang in it. So you're thinking there's 5 or 6 shooters in this van. We didn't know. All I knew is we had to stop that threat. We had to stop the killing, and that was one of the reasons I engaged the van the way I did, by disabling it, because I knew we didn't want to get into a rolling gunfight through town. That it was already bad enough. This was at 1:19 in the afternoon on a Thursday, pretty May day, and there was no coronavirus, so you could do whatever you wanted, so people were going everywhere. And then I can remember people running in the parking lot, trying to get away from the gunfire, and here we were running to it. But as we approached the van, all the windows were out by this point from the gunfire. There was over 200 rounds fired in the parking lot. We could tell that there was only 2 people in the van, and both of them were at that point slumped over. So we were figuring that they were incapacitated at that point.
Yeah,
that's when we went up. We approached the van, and we pulled the passenger out, and then pulled the driver out.
There's a question that I want to share with you. I'm going to ask you, and I'll let you think about it a little bit, and I'll talk it through with you. 10 years ago, right? what's going on in Sheriff Neal's, then Game Warden Neal's life?
10 years in that dash.
Yeah. Yeah. What's life like, man? I mean, obviously, as the sheriff, you're the boss, but every day you've got to live with this.
You do. So
to carry that around.
And I'll start with on scene. There's a new normal. Nothing ever goes back to normal. It doesn't go back the way it was. It's kind of like the ripple in the water. It changes. So there's a new normal, and it on scene. I thought that was dumb. I'm going to be arrested. First of all, I'm going to get fired. I tore up my truck. I crashed it in the middle of the Walmart parking lot and shot 2 people. I'm going to jail. So that was the first thing. And then time starts progressing on, and the PTSD, which I didn't realize that I had, because I'm that guy. I don't have that. I don't, that's for weak people. That's not I don't have that problem. I grew up in the funeral business, so I was around death and dying all the time. So that, that doesn't bother me. But, 10 years later, looking back, I realized I was a mess. I was really screwed up. I was struggling really bad. I felt like everybody had turned against me, and that was just PTSD is what it was.
Yeah.
It took a long time to get to the point that I am right now. And 10 years ago today, I don't want to go back there. I would never go back there. I don't want anything that's back there. My life today is so much better.
Marcia and her team really push an officer wellness message so we can avoid putting more names on that wall.
Oh, absolutely.
You had 2 comrades that are shot across the parking lot, the sheriff and his chief deputy. In retrospect, right, thinking officer wellness, shots are fired, there's death, there's destruction. What would you advise they do differently? What would you have done differently?
Well, in training, we train for scenarios. No scenario is ever going to be the same. That scenario probably never happened like that again. So training for that scenario would be really tough. Honestly, it worked the way it should have. Unfortunately, I wish we could have changed the fact that WA and Sheriff Busby were shot for sure. But if they wouldn't have pulled in that side of the parking lot, the guys would have been rolling. They'd have been going. If they wouldn't have made that head-on traffic stop, which is the most dangerous traffic stop you can ever make, you don't have that vantage point of concealment as you do from behind. So they're wide open. If they wouldn't have made that traffic stop, these guys would have been rolling. And this would have been a rolling gun battle. They were not going to go down peacefully. That was their mission.
Yeah, let's talk about that before we go to the next break. What was their mission? And we're going to get to this in a bit. How did we find out about that mission? But what is their mission now? You're assuming it's death and destruction of anything in front of them. Assuming is that what it is?
Yeah, their mission. So they were sovereign citizens. So they were extremists. They had kind of gone off the reservation with their thinking, and in some of their videos that they had on YouTube, they talked about people would ask them questions. They were teaching classes on how to become a sovereign citizen, and they were telling people, what do you do if you engage law enforcement or whatever? They'd say, pull your gun, engage the law enforcement. That was their mindset, was to engage law enforcement. And the one even said, if I ever start, I won't be able to stop killing cops. So that was their mission. I mean, they knew once they started, they were going to try to kill as many as they could. fortunately, we were able to stop that after 2 were killed and 2 more were critically injured.
I'm going to ask you one question before we go to break.
Sure.
We hear this often, that the hardest 2 calls for law enforcement are domestic violence disputes. Obviously, emotions are running high. There's a lot of uncertainty behind the doors, and then those traffic stops late at night. This situation, it's all there in front of you. I'm sure in the moment, it's bright white lights. You can see everything in front of you perfectly in retrospect.
Right.
At that moment, are you thinking, wow, it's here. I can see what I see right now is in this tunnel. It's in this straw view. Does that resonate with you?
100%. Yeah, their tunnel vision was there. I'm so glad that, we weren't in Baghdad or Iraq or something like that, where threats are coming from every angle. Fortunate for us, it was directly in front of us, because I promise you, I was very honed in on what was right in front of me and not what was going on around me. I was trying to eliminate the threat directly in front of me. So
before we left, Sheriff, I remember you saying it was 17 minutes or maybe 19 minutes.
17 seconds.
What's that?
17 seconds. I'm glad it wasn't 17 minutes. Yeah.
I beg your pardon. I did mean second. What are all the things that happen in 17 seconds or don't happen? I mean, obviously, not a 2-minute egg, not a 1-minute egg. What other things don't happen or could happen in 17 seconds?
Right. It doesn't seem like 17 seconds is very long, but the way I like to compare it to people is hold your breath for 17 seconds and see how that feels, because in that gunfight, I can promise you I was holding my breath. One, the glass was the dust in the glass and the fragments flying through. At one point, I guess I did have my mouth on because it was full of glass, but those 17 seconds, there was so much chaos going on that it's hard for your mind. Well, you're not going to remember it all, it's hard for your mind to process everything that's going on. And your brain kind of kicks into that fight or flight mode, and then that's where your training kicks in. Once you get into that full adrenaline and into those lobes of the brain and how it works, it's pretty interesting.
We just had a question. Can we do 17 seconds of silence? I think that's a great question. I'd say we can. Yeah, let's do it. In that period of time, changed your life. Quick question from the audience here. Great job, Sheriff. It's going by fast. It says, here's a question for you. How does your experience impact you today, and how do you lead young deputies who've not been through such an experience? I got that last one first. How do you lead the younger men and women coming out into the business?
Man, I tell you, there's only one way to lead, and that's not from behind. You lead by example. You lead by doing it. Hopefully, what I do as sheriff and the way I work, the guys see it. I'm not going to send them into a situation that I'm not there with them. We're so small, I have to be there. So I lead by being there with them in the middle of it. And I push a lot of training on guys. We're pushing more. We got training coming up here in a couple of weeks that we're going to put the guys through. But you got to lead by example. You got to lead out front.
I hear that a lot from our members. Next question is kind of an interesting one as well. Is what would you tell new sheriffs coming that are in their just elected, just about to be elected, start their term? Aside from telling them they should be involved with their national association, what would you say to them?
Well, I'm not an old sheriff by no means. I'm on my 5th year as sheriff. I've been through a lot of trials and tribulations as sheriff, and they're going to get them too. And the one thing I would encourage them is, one, you're going to have thick skin. It doesn't matter what you do, it's never going to be correct. You're not perfect. Don't try to be perfect. Just follow the guidelines and the rules and do the job the best that you can. Most perfect man in the world walked this earth, and they crucified him. Why do you think you're going to be perfect? That's kind of the way I feel about it. And don't take it personal. I did that for a long time. I took it personal. I took the hits that I was taking as a sheriff personal. That comes with a job. You're just going to have to let those hits roll off and go on to the next one. So don't take it personal, and get some thick skin. Lead by example. Be the leader.
Yeah. Question. When you were the suspects injured after the impact now, or after the scene, you've had your investigation, what does it show? Were people injured at impact? Had they already been wounded? Had they been, what level of incapacitated are they at this point? I mean, obviously this is all in your after action. You know this now. What did you learn?
I don't believe they were seriously injured in the impact. I know the passenger was not. The driver is the one that took the actual hit. It hit his seat, but as far as injury to him, I don't believe he was injured, because he was able to turn in his seat to point the gun at me, because he had to, bend all the way around and point the gun over his shoulder. So he wasn't incapacitated by any means. He was still very, very violent at that point.
I have a question for you about going back to training for a second. You've said that you obviously have you have a company, a side business that you lead, and we're going to ask you to tell a little bit more about that before we sign off here in a few minutes. But when you go back to how law enforcement has changed in the 10 years in that interregnum, what's changed in training? What is it? Has it become? I mean, obviously, technology's been a big part of training, but what in your mind has made training more efficient or effective, and what needs to be done? What do we need to be giving our agency heads and our law enforcement officers and deputies? What are we missing?
Well, first of all, if their agency is still going to the range twice, 3 times, whatever it is a year, and shooting a paper target and saying, okay, we're good for the year, let's go, they're failing their department. They're failing their men. The administration, they need to change that attitude and that form of training. Also, the stagnant line training, we're starting to see change. Yes, there is a proficiency that the officer needs to be able to shoot, but I'm going to tell you, in a shooting situation, a lot of that goes out the window. They need the basic fundamentals. Then it needs to advance into something that is raising their heart level, that is increasing their mental cognicy, their thinking ability. They've got to be able to get out of that zone and get focused on the task at hand, running and shooting, making approach on whatever. That's the things that are advancing in training now that weren't 10 years ago. And that's what I do is in my company is teach guys how to do that, and in administration. So there's a lot more focus on the mental aspect of the job now. 10 years ago, 3 days, hey, get back in the truck, go back to work. That's what they told me. They didn't know what to do with me. I didn't know what to do with me. Now, you're seeing a little bit more preparedness for agencies are working more to help guys after a shooting.
Okay.
In the academy, they send you to the academy and they teach you all the tools that you need to do your job. But one thing they didn't teach us is what happens after you do it. What happens after you have to take a life? Nobody wants to do that. They don't teach you that the worst fight that you'll ever be in your life is at night when you turn off the lights, and that's with yourself. So that's where things are changing. That's the most significant change I have seen in law enforcement in the past 10 years is protecting the guy's mental health.
Yeah, I think you put your finger on something, is that everybody has weaknesses, and you know, we all have to recognize those. Talk a little bit about how many people were wounded and killed as a result of this incident.
Bill Evans and Brandon Paudert were the first two officers that were murdered. And then W.A. Wren, the chief deputy, and Sheriff Dick Busby were the second two that were critically injured. I was injured in it, but mine were scratches. I mean, it wasn't nothing. And then the suspects ultimately were fatalities in the situation.
Yeah.
So you had 4 killed, 2 critically injured. You had a total, I want to say it was 17 shooters in the parking lot that engaged in the gunfight, with over 200 rounds in a Walmart parking lot that's not very big. So it was a lot going on.
Question.
Sure.
The professionalism to do exactly what you just said is that you've got 17 people with high-powered rifles, guns, shooting, and no innocence.
None.
No innocence. That means that law enforcement did not only its job, but it exceeded what it had to do. Is that what I'm hearing?
There were 6 total cars in the entire parking lot that were hit with gunfire. That's including ours and the suspect. So, yeah, the professionalism was there, 100%. No innocent bystanders were injured at all.
Mike, I can't say thank you in the right words. I know I speak for a grateful nation, a grateful community, your fellow sheriffs across the country. I want to thank you so very much for what you did, and appreciate you sharing this with us. And I know you carry those wounds for a long, long time. And if I were there, I'd give you an honor coin and tell you, God bless you and thank you. And on behalf of the memorial, the foundation, I see Marcia giving me the hook sign. I want to tell you what an honor it is to work with you, to be your executive director. I hope I meet your expectations every day. God bless you. Thank you. Let you wrap it up to anything you want to say, and then I'll turn it over to Marcia.
No, I appreciate the time, and I appreciate everything the museum's done, and take good care of my truck.
God bless you. Marcia, back to you.
Jonathan, thank you. Thank you. And I've asked Thomas to keep Sheriff Neal up on the screen. But in the meanwhile, I first want to thank Josh and Drew and Philip for being with us tonight. When they were invited to join us, without hesitation, they agreed. And so thank you very much. And Jonathan, you never disappoint. Thank you for being there as a board member and as a friend and as a good moderator for tonight's discussion. But Sheriff Neal, I especially wanted to talk personally to you and say to you that if I was there 10 years ago, it would have been you I would have been hoping was pulling up. So I extend to you gratitude for those who were there that 10 years ago today. I also think that it is so appropriate for this event to have happened the way that it did tonight, because it's because of people like you. It's because of law enforcement all around the country that allows Josh and Philip and Drew to be free and to be safe and to celebrate through great pork belly and chocolate and bourbon. And I think that these two things come together very appropriately. And I hope that you wake up every morning knowing that your efforts, what you do every day, keeps us safe and keeps us able to celebrate, but at the same time, recognize the sacrifices that are made by law enforcement all around the country. I honor you. I invite you to Washington as soon as this thing lifts. And I promise you to give you a personal tour of the memorial as well as the museum. And I know that there's 49 members of my staff that are eager to welcome you when you get there. So put that on your agenda.
Absolutely. I love coming up there. I like DC. So.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I would also like to let everybody know that on June 3rd, we will be hosting our next event. It's the Definition of Insanity that will provide an opportunity to screen the film, Definition of Insanity, followed by a panel discussion exploring Miami-Dade County's criminal mental health project. So again, thank you to Thomson Reuters for making tonight possible. Thank you all for joining us, and have a really great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this edition of Encore, and for following along in this series about Sheriff Mike Neal's heroic efforts more than 13 years ago. We thank you for your support, and remember, our upcoming episode releases are every Wednesday, and published exclusively on Tuesdays is our monthly Icons episode. We hope you learned something from this episode of Encore, and will join us again next time for another edition of Encore, where we revisit past museum programs and conversations. A special thanks to all of you for listening to this episode of Encore, a series from the Precinct 444 Podcast Network by the National Law Enforcement Museum. Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. We would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@nleomf.org. You can help us make our content even better. The National Law Enforcement Museum is located at 444 East Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and is dedicated to telling the story of American law enforcement. We expand and enrich the relationship between law enforcement and the community through educational journeys, immersive exhibitions, and insightful programs. Find us online at lawenforcementmuseum.org and stay tuned for more podcast content from Precinct 444. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you at the Precinct.